Hello, my friend, and welcome to the study. Today's video is called The Valley of No Return. We're going to talk about the story about this magical valley in Brittany. But don't worry, we have magic, so we'll be returning. Because you'll be safe right here in the study, where we're going to listen to a bit of literary history, look at some maps, some medieval text, and best of all, have a story about friendship and loyalty, magic, enchantment, and love. So relax and get comfortable, because for the next half hour it's just you and me in the study. The Valley of No Return is also known by other names, both in French and English. Le Val Sans Retour, Vale of No Return, Dolores Valley, Valley of False Lovers, Val des Faux Amants, and Val Périlleux, or the Perilous Vale. It is a site shrouded in the myth of Arthurian legend. It is located in central Brittany, in the Pimpon forest in Morbihan. This vale is formed by an extension of the Pimpon forest massif. It is surrounded by ridges and cut through with purple schist and red rock, typical of the Breton region. The valley as a whole has suffered various fires throughout the 20th century due to the prevalence of conifers. Oak and pine grow here between rocky moors and wooded swathes of land. The forest is home to a wide variety of birds, and due to the variety and fragility of its flora and fauna, it is subject to several ecological protections. It was the first place to claim a link with the sites of Arthurian legend. During the Celtic revival of the 19th century, claims of Arthurian sites in Brittany became increasingly popular, especially with the renewed interest in medieval literature. Contained within Pimpon is Brocéliande, the elusive, enchanted forest that captured medieval imagination as a place of magic and mystery. It is here that one might imagine the presence of Merlin, Morgana le Fay, the Lady of the Lake, and the Knights of the Round Table and their courtly adventures. First appearing in Wass's Roman de Rou in about 1160, it soon became an inspirational setting for more Arthurian lore. Even Brocéliande's weather is said to be unique and unusual, and all manner of mystical attributes were given to it as the centuries continued to produce stories, though no one really knows where its exact location is. The Val Sans Retour itself is an enchanted trap created by King Arthur's half-sister, Morgan le Fay, or Morgana, a powerful enchantress. In the prose Lancelot, she appears as a complex figure, both antagonist and ally, often using her magic for her own desires and intrigues against Arthur and his knights, particularly Sir Lancelot. The valley is filled with illusions and obstacles, and once a knight enters, he is unable to find his way out. Perhaps the best example of the story of the Valley of No Return is from the Lancelot Grail cycle, a compilation of Arthurian texts from the 13th century, written in Old French. Contained within this extensive cycle are the Vulgate Histoire de Saint Graal, the story of the Holy Grail, the Vulgate Histoire de Merlin, the story of Merlin, the cycle's centerpiece, Lancelot en prose, also known as Histoire de Lancelot, the story of Lancelot. The longest part, making up half of the entire cycle, and actually written first around 1210 to 1215. The last two parts are the Vulgate Quest de Saint Graal, or Quest for the Holy Grail, and the Vulgate Mort du Roi Arthur, or Death of King Arthur, also known as La Mort Arthur. The cycle has a narrative structure in which multiple overlapping events featuring different characters may simultaneously develop in parallel and interlace with each other, making them easily reworkable and adaptable, and immensely popular. Stories of the Lancelot cycle were indeed immensely popular in medieval Europe from the 12th century through to the 16th and even beyond in print. They survived in some 200 manuscripts, not counting printed books, the first of which is a 1488 edition of the Lancelot. The earliest copies are French in origin and date from 1220 to 1230. Numerous copies were produced in French throughout the remainder of the 13th and 14th and well into the 15th centuries in France, England, and Italy, as well as translations and reworkings into other European languages. Some of these manuscripts are richly illuminated. The British Library Royal Manuscript 14E3, produced in northern France in the early 14th century, and once owned by King Charles V of France, contains over 100 miniatures with gilding throughout and decorated borders at the beginning of each section. This is a fine copy from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and sections survive in many of the great libraries in Europe. After its completion around 1230 to 1235, the Lancelot Grail was soon followed by a major reworking known as the Post-Vulgate cycle. Together, the two prose cycles, with their abundance of characters and stories, represent a major source of the legend of Arthur, as they constituted the most widespread form of Arthurian literature of the late medieval period. These were both translated into multiple European languages and rewritten into alternative variants, some in verse. They also inspired various later works of Arthurian romance, eventually contributing the most to Malory's compilation, Le Morte d'Arthur, that formed the basis for a modern canon of Arthuriana that is still prevalent today. The cycle's actual authorship is unknown, but it is believed to have been written by multiple authors. There is one theory that Eleanor of Aquitaine, while she was queen to Henry II of England, set up the project in 1194. Eleanor came from Aquitaine and is the granddaughter of William IX of Aquitaine, the first troubadour. She is said to have been very active and vivacious, and to have loved poetry, especially the Matière de Bretagne, the Arthurian legends. So it would not have been unlikely that she would have been involved at the court commissioning the writing of this work. In fact, the Welsh author Gautier Mapp, whose work we've also seen in the study, is sometimes attributed to be the editing author of this grand cycle. Each part also might have been composed separately, also arranged separately or together gradually, and then rewritten. The story of the vow occurs in an episode during the quest to free Gawain from Cardoc's prison at the Dolorous Tower, a long and involved adventure upon which Lancelot embarks with Galescalin and Yvain. Within that is the story of Morgan Le Fay and the Valley of No Return that I shall tell you now. In the days when King Arthur ruled Camelot, his half-sister, the enchantress Morgan Le Fay, harboured a heart full of both wisdom and vengeance. Morgan, gifted in magic and skilled in the mystical arts, had long lived in the shadow of Arthur's court. Though once bound to the court by blood and kinship, her desires often led her down darker paths, especially when it came to matters of the heart. Years before, Morgan had fallen in love with a valiant knight named Sir Guillemar, Guinevere's nephew, sent to be raised at the king's court, as was tradition, a man whose bravery rivaled the best of Arthur's Round Table. But Guillemar's loyalty faltered. Taking the advice of his aunt, the queen, he spurned Morgan's love. Then one day Morgan caught him in the embrace of another woman. Deeply wounded and consumed with anger, Morgan vowed never to let such treachery go unpunished. She set out from Arthur's court to seek Merlin and learn magic from him. With her new knowledge of magic, Morgan cast a powerful enchantment upon a hidden valley deep within the forest of Brocéliande. The valley became known as the Valley of No Return, a cursed place where any knight who had betrayed a lady in love would be imprisoned, trapped by illusions and the forces of magic. Here the ground seemed to shift beneath the feet of those who entered. The trees moved of their own accord, and the air was thick with enchantments. Those who wandered into the valley and were unfaithful could never find their way out. Only a completely faithful lover who is capable of overcoming the trials in the Vale will be able to free the knights, which included defeating dragons, overcoming a wall of fire, and crossing a pool surrounded by cliffs. Many knights tried and failed, and these men were condemned to roam the valley forever, lost to the outside world. Knights from far and wide fell prey to Morgan's curse. Many, guilty of disloyalty or broken vows, entered the Valley of No Return, believing they could overcome its dangers, only to be ensnared by the powerful magic that wrapped around them like a net. The valley became their prison, and their cries for help were carried away by the wind, never to reach the ears of Camelot's heroes. Morgan revelled in her creation, watching from afar as the valley claimed victim after victim. Sir Gallasgalin entered and came first to a low gate, where he dismounted. He then passed through a large hall to a vault guarded by 2 pairs of chained dragons, which attacked only knights, and from which his sword rebounded as from an anvil. Next he came to a narrow plank spanning deep water, from which 2 knights pushed him in. 4 men rescued him from the water, took his sword, shield, and helmet, and led him in to meet his fellow prisoners, who included 3 other companions of the Round Table, Cahedin, Garret, and Yvain. The greatest knights of Arthur's realm were powerless against Morgan's spell. It held some 250 captives. But Morgan's enchantment was not to last forever. One day, a rumour spread through Camelot that many of its finest knights were missing. They had ventured into the cursed valley and had not returned. Among those lost was Sir Ector, a noble knight and the foster brother of Sir Lancelot du Lac, the greatest of Arthur's knights. When Lancelot learned that Ector was trapped, he vowed to rescue him, even if it meant facing Morgan's deadly magic. With his heart full of determination, Lancelot rode to the Valley of No Return. He had heard of the enchantments that lay within, and the fate of those who had failed before him. But his courage was unmatched. His loyalty to his brother and his steadfast devotion to Queen Guinevere gave him strength beyond any spell. As Lancelot entered the valley, the enchantments rose to meet him. The ground twisted beneath his horse, and the trees whispered lies, trying to confuse him. Visions of past betrayals and temptations swirled about him, conjured by Morgan's magic to test the purity of his heart. But Lancelot was unwavering. Though his love for Guinevere was forbidden, it was true, and no force in the world could make him falter in his devotion. He slew the dragons and crossed the plank. He had in his possession a ring given him by the fairy who raised him, the Lady of the Lake. It had the power to dispel enchantments, and the plank with its guarding knights vanished. Step by step, Lancelot resisted the illusions. He fought against the shadows that clung to him, using his strength and his heart's purity to navigate the cursed valley. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he reached the heart of the enchantment. Lancelot cut down several illusory defenders, chasing one down the hall stairs, through a garden and over an enchanted stream, through another large hall, and into the pavilion where Morgan lay asleep. Lancelot slew the defender, and then apologized to the enchantress for entering her chamber and waking her. Thus did Lancelot break the spell and free the knights who had been trapped, among them his beloved brother Hector. The spell that held them was powerful, But Lancelot's courage and love were stronger. With a mighty strike of his sword and a prayer to heaven, he shattered the magical barrier. The enchantment crumbled, and the valley's spell was broken. The trapped knights, freed at last, emerged from their prison and returned to Camelot with Lancelot as their saviour. Morgan Le Fay watched from afar, knowing that her magic had been undone by a force she could not conquer, the power of true, unwavering loyalty. Though her plot had failed, Morgan remained, always seeking new ways to challenge Arthur's knights, her heart still a mix of darkness and light. And so, the Valley of No Return faded into legend, remembered as a place where treachery and love was punished, and where only the purest of hearts could find their way to freedom. Lancelot's success highlights his superiority as a knight and his purity of heart in the context of chivalric ideals, despite the complexity of his character and relationship with Guinevere. Morgan Le Fay's role in the Valley of No Return shows her cunning and magical prowess, but it also underscores her tragic character. She is a woman wronged, seeking vengeance against those who fail to uphold the ideals of courtly love. Almost a classical tale gone courtly medieval. Despite Morgan's actions against Arthur and his knights, she is not purely evil. Her character embodies the tension between power, passion, and betrayal, between courtly ideals and disloyalty. These themes appear in stories throughout European history, from the classical era to the modern. The enchantress with ambiguous character, not entirely evil, who can bend reality to her will, vengeance sought for betrayal, entrapment, a hero who can break the spell, feminine power and independence, and redemption through virtue, as well as magic and love. We see this in the multi-layered episodes of stories such as Circe in the Odyssey and Orlando Furioso, for example, both which we shall visit in the study at a future date. Leaving behind the enchanted forest of Brocéliande, we say farewell at Le Rocher des Faux Amants, the false lover's rock. Two interlocking rocks overlooking the Valley of No Return, said to resemble the figures of two lovers embracing. These rocks are said to be the figures of the knight Guimard and his lover, turned to stone by jealous Morgan when she discovered them together on the crest of the valley. So, my friend, you can now drift off to peace, a peaceful sleep, as this night, under a tree in Brocéliande, the sparkles of magic and enchantment about him, reflected in the soft light of the fairy's mirror. May you sleep peacefully and wake happily. Be good to yourself, be kind to others, and be extraordinary.